today's episode starts with a woman named Teresita Basa. Teresita was a great musician, and once she mastered her skills, the goal was for her to become a professional performer or a composer. She also gave piano lessons to children in her neighborhood who wanted to learn. And get this, Teresita never even charged for those lessons. Before she got her degree, Teresita realized she wanted to spend her life caring for other people, not performing music for them. So she changed her major and decided to study medicine instead. By 1977, Teresita was 48 years old. She worked as a respiratory therapist at the local Edgewater Hospital. But on February 21st, many of her neighbors in her apartment building in Chicago noticed something strange. Her unit smelled like burning and ash. So at 9 p.m., a bunch of firefighters climbed into their truck and rushed toward Teresita's apartment. And her unit was full of black smoke. There was a mattress lying randomly in the middle of the living room. It was clear that the fire had begun when someone had lit it on fire intentionally. And under the mattress, there was the dead body of an adult woman. This had just gone from responding to a fire to a homicide investigation. It was hard to say who she was. She was nude. There was a huge butcher's knife sticking out the middle of her chest. This was Teresita. They brought the police onto the scene and they began to investigate. Initially, the investigators assumed the killer had sexually assaulted her, except then her autopsy showed no signs of sexual violence. The only lead the detectives had was a note that Teresita had apparently written to herself. It was in her handwriting in her appointment book. Now, it wasn't clear who or what AS was or why Teresita was buying them tickets or what the tickets were for, but either way, the officers began questioning all of Teresita's friends and coworkers. And they asked if any of these people knew the initials AS or if that was the name of a business or an abbreviation that Teresita was known to use, except nobody in her life had any idea what that meant. So within a few months, the trail had actually gone completely cold, and the police were forced to close the case while it was still unsolved. But then, the officers got a new tip around late August or early September of 1977, except the tip was very odd. It was from a man named Jose Chua Jr. Jose was a doctor who worked in the same hospital as Teresita. He comes to police and says he knows exactly who had murdered his coworker. Jose said that Teresita had actually told him, or more accurately, her ghost had. See, Jose explained that he was married to a woman named Remy, and then one night, Remy was working an overnight shift at the hospital, and by the time she clocked out, she was too tired to safely drive home, so she slipped off into a break room to just get some sleep. And while Remy was lying on a cot, she saw a figure step into the room with her, and when she sat up, she realized the figure was her dear friend, Teresita. Eventually, though, Teresita's spirit faded away, leaving Remy alone again. So 2 weeks go by, and one evening, she was home with her husband. Jose came into the room to check on her and see if she was okay, and Remy opened her eyes, sat up, and started talking to him in Tagalog. He noticed that his wife's voice sounded different. So obviously, he's like, Remy, what's going on? And she answers in a different language, Doctor, I would like to ask for your help. The man who murdered me is still at large. So again, he's like, what's going on? Do you know who I am? What is your name? And Remy answers, I am Teresita. And then Remy said that Teresita had been killed by a man they all knew. His name was Alan Showery. Now, Alan also worked at the same hospital. So according to Remy, shortly before the murder, Teresita's television broke. And when she mentioned it to Alan at work, he said, I can come over and fix it. He tried to rob her. She fought back. Things escalated. Alan ended up stabbing her with the knife, stealing her jewelry, and then setting her mattress on fire in the hopes of destroying the evidence. Now, of course, when Jose goes to cops, he's skeptical about this whole story. He doesn't believe in ghosts, except Remy said she could prove that what she was saying was true. Remy said that Teresita's relatives knew all about the jewelry she owned and wore, and they would be able to identify any pieces that were missing from her apartment. So he writes the phone numbers down and assures Remy, in the morning, I will call the police. But then when he woke up the next morning, he didn't share the tip. Instead, he asked Remy about the wild dreams she'd clearly been having the night before, and Remy has no idea what he's talking about. She's like, I don't remember any of that. That was until a few nights later when the same thing happened again. This time she asked Jose why he wasn't helping. So that was when Jose gathered the phone numbers and called the investigators. But obviously the investigators also have their doubts. So the officers figured, okay, we might as well just question Alan, see if he knows anything. After all, his initials were A.S. And as soon as they arrived, he acted like he had been expecting them. He willingly agreed to go to the station with them for an interrogation. Alan said he'd agreed to come over and fix her TV, except according to Alan, he arrived sometime after 6 in the evening, came into the unit and realized he didn't have the tools he needed. He assumed the killer must have broken in at some point after his departure, but he had had nothing to do with it. Alan's story was so eerily similar to what the ghost had apparently said. So the officers decided to investigate further. They reached out to Alan's girlfriend, but the moment she arrived at the station, the officers noticed something unusual. Alan's girlfriend was wearing a pearl ring and a pin made of jade. Again, this is the jewelry that Teresita's spirit had described. It's an exact match. So they immediately are like, where'd you get these? They're a gift from Alan. He'd given them to her as a late Christmas present, well after the holiday season and also after Teresita's murder. But just to make sure, the officers contacted Teresita's family members and said, hey, can you come look at this jewelry? They examined the pin and the ring and confirmed, yeah, these are Teresita's. Teresita's cousin was one of the people who looked at the jewelry. The police had known how to get in touch with the cousin because of the phone number Jose had given them. So yet again, the ghost was completely spot on. The evidence spoke for itself. Alan was at the scene of the crime on the night of the murder. He says so. He had jewelry that once belonged to Teresita. This was enough for the police in the 70s to formally arrest Alan. He gives a full confession. In it, he said he had killed Teresita for her jewelry. Alan said the crime wasn't premeditated. He hadn't been planning to hurt her when he first arrived at her apartment. The goal really was to go over, repair her TV, get paid, and leave. Except when he saw her ring and her pin, he just said he had to have them. And while her back was to him, Alan attacked. He wrapped an arm around Teresita's neck and squeezed, and then he dragged her into the living room, laid her on the floor, and grabbed a knife. He stabbed her in the chest to make sure she was dead. Alan dumped a bunch of clothes on top of her body and lit them on fire, and then he dragged the mattress out of her bedroom and put it on top of the remains and the clothes and burned it too. So at this point, the whole case seemed pretty open and shut, but then his public defender tried to get the case completely thrown out before it could even go to court. See, by law, detectives aren't supposed to arrest people or interrogate them without probable cause. By the time of his second interrogation, the officers had already learned that Alan's girlfriend had Teresita's jewelry, so that is probable cause. This was enough to convince the judge, and the trial moved forward. Alan publicly recanted his confession. He said he had only admitted to committing the murder because the police had coerced him into it. According to Alan, the officers had threatened to harass him and his girlfriend. So according to him, he just gave a false confession. And without the confession, the only real evidence the police had against him was the fact that he had given his girlfriend Teresita's jewelry. Except obviously, Alan had an explanation for that too. He said he bought the jewelry from Teresita legally. But Alan admitted, I didn't buy it directly from Teresita. I purchased it from Remy and Jose. He says he had no idea the jewelry was connected to an open murder case. And apparently, Remy and Alan had never gotten along. So their disagreements led to a lot of tension at work. So according to Alan, Remy got fired and then decided to get revenge on him. It started with her selling him the jewelry. Teresita had either loaned or given her the ring and pin before her death. He then says Remy lied to Jose, pretending Teresita's ghost had possessed her and named Alan as the killer. Now, this might sound very elaborate, but some jurors believed it. So when they came out of the deliberations, they were evenly split. Alan was scheduled to be retried 1 month later in November, except apparently he had a change of heart. He pled guilty to everything, the murder, the robbery, the arson, and was sentenced to 14 years in prison. There were still a lot of unanswered questions and mysteries around her murder. The biggest one was, did Teresita really come back as a ghost? Another explanation was that Remy was a lot more conscious and aware of her suspicions. In 1983, he was actually released from prison early on parole. Maybe the justice system was going easy on him. He had served a total of 6 years, but from the sound of things, he had really changed after his time behind bars. He was never connected to any other robberies or violent crimes. He went on to live a quiet life. But let's be real, there is nothing ordinary about this story. Every day, people have to reevaluate our understanding of what is possible. And maybe it's time to redefine what we believe about the afterlife, too.